Vladimir Vladimirovich, addressing the message, you figuratively speaking, took trillion after trillion out of your sleeve. And so, they proposed a plan for the development of the country that is absolutely amazing. This is a different Russia, with a different infrastructure, a different social system. Well, just a dream country. But I just want to ask your favorite question from Vysotsky, where is the money, Zin? Have we earned them at all? First of all, this has all been curtailed as a result of the painstaking work of the expert community, government specialists, and the administration. Everything completely fits into the budget rules, and in fact, is quite conservative in nature. Because some experts believe that there should be and will be more income, which means that it would be necessary to plan large expenditures, because this should directly affect, the prospects for economic development. But on the whole, it is correct, but in the 18th year, we also plan to allocate 8 trillion rubles for the development of the economy and the social sphere, and then we increase these expenditures. I think it is quite likely that if everything develops as optimists from this environment, which I have mentioned, experts say, then we can, should, and will be able to increase these costs in various areas. So we are talking about a 6-year period. That's right. It is a question of a 6-year period. We are now setting up a budget for a 3-year period, for a 3-year, as we say, planned period. But of course, we and everyone, when we were preparing for the message, I say we were preparing for the message, because the team is a whole job. We proceeded from the assumption that we would calculate our income and expenses in those areas that we consider key, priority areas, for 6 years. But still, there are literally stunning projects. For example, the Sochi-Jubga highway is 130 kilometers, of which 90 kilometers are tunnels. The rest are probably bridges. So, judging by the landscape, 3 billion, 1.5 billion in the first 3 years only. And the track, ideally, should be ready in the 30th year. That is, in general, how necessary is this, and is it enough to win? People need it this time. After all, families with children cannot get to Sochi by car. Everyone is somewhere in the Gelendzhik area and stops at Novorossiysk. Because the track is very hard, serpentine. There are several options for construction there. Then we will discuss it literally in the next few days, or do it before Jubga, or first do it from Jubga to Sochi, do it in stages, some members of the government suggest. Others believe that you need to do everything at once, because otherwise there will be a narrow neck from Jubga to. Therefore, the first part, if you look from Novorossiysk, it's more or less like decent, and the coverage is not bad, but very narrow. And if we do it before the case, like the first part, then there may be traffic jams in this small space, which are still enough there. In general, we will determine this with specialists. How, by what stages, but you need to do it. It is necessary to determine, of course, the final cost of the project to achieve. To ensure that everyone stays within these financial plans. First of all, the interests of the people, but also the economy, the development of territories in the south of the country, is very important. But at school, we can afford such large-scale investments, which means that the country is rapidly getting richer. Moreover, in the conditions of almost 15,000 sanctions, completely wild. Moreover, we also set ourselves the task of reducing poverty, including for large families, for children. But isn't it too bold? Look, if you go back to this road, when I discussed with members of the government, as you know, the Ministry of Finance, it is always such a miser in a good sense. Everything is very conservative about spending. And then the finance minister told me, almost verbatim, he says, it is against the construction of this road by those who have never driven on it today. Roll everything. And he's right, because it's especially for a family with children. As for whether we are getting richer or not, the economy is growing. It's a fact. Moreover, it is a fact that has been recorded not by us, but by international organizations, economic and financial. Indeed, we have overtaken the Federal Republic of Germany in terms of purchasing power priority, taking its place, the 5th place among the largest economies in the world. The German economy shrank by zero, as much as, in my opinion, 0.3% over the past year, and we grew by 3 to 0.6%. Japan has grown a small percentage. But if everything develops at the same pace as today, then we have every chance to take the place of Japan and become the 4th economy in the world, and in the short term, in the near future. But here too, it must be said honestly, objectively, there is a difference between the qualities of our economy. In terms of purchasing power priority, that is, in terms of volume, we are really 5th now, and there is every chance of taking Japan's place. But the structure of the economies of these countries, of course, differs favorably from ours. And we still need to do a lot to ensure that not only in terms of purchasing power parity, but also per capita, we have a decent position first. And secondly, so that the structure itself changes, so that it becomes much more efficient, more modern, more innovative. That's what we're going to work on. As for income, but according to the priority of purchasing power, this is a very important indicator. This is the volume, the size of the economy. This means that the state receives funds for solving strategic tasks through the tax system at all levels. This gives us the opportunity to develop in the way we consider necessary for our country. By the way, here you are talking about the structure, about the need for structural changes in our economy. But this is exactly what was laid down in your message, and this is how the task is set, so that innovative industries grow faster than the average economy. Well, yes, of course. Well, I've already said that. The structure is what we have to work on, and a lot depends on it. But the future of our economy, the future of labor resources, efficiency and labor productivity depend on it. One of the main tasks today is to increase labor productivity. Because in conditions of shortage of workers, labor resources, we have only one way of effective development. Increase labor productivity. This, in turn, means that we must increase the innovative beginning of the economy, let's say, increase the density of robotics. Today, we have 10 robots, in my opinion, 10,000 working. We need to have at least 1,000 robots for 10,000 working. In my opinion, this is how it is in Japan, in my opinion. That is, so that people can work on such a new technique and not only use robotics, but also other modern means of production. We need to cook them. Another problem arises. This is training. That's why we have designated whole areas, including engineering training. Well, surely you have noticed, we have now launched 30 modern engineering schools across the country. This year, we are launching 20 more, and there will be 50. And we are planning another 50 in the coming years. Therefore, in these areas, this is the future of our country. We will develop in these areas. But, in order to end the sanctions, Many are expressing the idea of creating a special body that would deal with sanctions, their reflection. In general, it is clear that something similar is supposed to be protected from sanctions, or does it make no sense? No need to just. We are analyzing both the government, the central bank, and the Security Council. We analyze everything that our enemies do. After all, much is being done not even for political and non-military reasons, although it is argued by this, but is being done simply for reasons of competition, in bad faith. Unfair competition, hiding behind some political or military considerations. This was the case in the aircraft industry, and it happens in so many other industries. Well, we live in the world that exists, and we have adapted to it. We understand who we are dealing with. And this is still evident from the results of our work. We are acting quite effectively. But the insidiousness of the West is not limited to sanctions. Here is a direct quote from your address. The West is trying to drag us into a new arms race in order to exhaust and repeat the trick that they succeeded in the 80s of the USSR. How is it here? How big a margin of safety do we have here, in terms of an arms race in fact? Here, we need to get the maximum return for every ruble invested in the defense industry. Indeed, during the Soviet era, no one counted these expenses there, and unfortunately, no one was chasing efficiency in our country. Defense spending accounted for about 13% of the Soviet Union's GDP. I will not refer to our statistics, we will refer to the Stockholm Institute. Last year, our defense spending was 4%, and this year, it was 6 to 8%. In other words, we have grown by 2 8/10%. In principle, this is a noticeable increase, but absolutely not critical. In the Soviet Union, there were 13%, and we are now 6 and 8. Here, I must say that they accelerate the economy with defense spending. They make her more energetic. But here, of course, there are limitations. We understand this. Here is this eternal question, which is more profitable than guns or oil? We mean it. Although, I repeat, we even have a modern defense industry. It is good because it does not just indirectly affect the civilian industry. And she herself, using innovations necessary for defense, uses these innovations for the production of civilian products. This is an extremely important thing. But first of all, our expenses, of course, are incomparable, as in the United States. They are under 900, 800, 60, 70 billion there. This is absolutely incomparable with our expenses. Simple, I think it's sawing there, because they don't have hypersound. No, I'm going to explain what's going on. The fact is that they spend a lot of money on maintenance. And not only for salaries, but also for maintenance, for the maintenance of bases around the world. And then everything goes into a black hole. There's nothing to count. That's where the main cut goes. Although, in the production of weapons of destruction, weapons in general, money is also spent there, which is difficult to assess. If we calculate how much they cost us, say, a well-known missile defense system, and one of the main components of overcoming missile defense on our part is the avant-garde intercontinental. An intercontinental missile, a gliding block of intercontinental range. Well, just incomparable values. And we, in fact, zeroed out everything they did, everything they invested in this missile defense system. That's the way to act. And of course, without any doubt, the economy of our armed forces itself, it must meet today's requirements. Vladimirovich, the word justice is a magic word for the Russian language. You use it very carefully, but still one day, you uttered this word in your message, and it sounded like lightning. You said that the distribution of the tax burden should become more equitable in Russia, and suggested that the government think about it. In which direction to think? Well, you know, indeed, the distribution of this tax burden, it should be fair in the sense that corporations, legal entities and individuals who earn more should be allocated to the general treasury, as they say, for solving national tasks, and above all, for solving tasks to combat poverty, if you see. Progressive tax. In fact, a progressive tax. I would not like to go into details now, we need to work on this. And in this way, we need to build this system, so that it really gives a great return for solving, first of all, social issues and tasks facing the state in this area. We plan to reduce the tax burden, for example, for large families, and take a number of other steps in this direction. It seems to me that society is perceived. This is absolutely normal, the first one. And the second, what is the business itself asking of us? They ask us to decide on the taxation system, but do not touch it anymore so that it is stable. This is the most important request and requirements from the business side. This is what the government should do in the very near future, together with the deputies of the State Duma, to submit a proposal. We won't scare anyone off with a progressive tax. We used to be afraid of scaring someone off with this progressive tax all the time. No, I don't think so. In principle, this system has been established in our country. Even those who were ardent supporters of this flat scale, the authors of this flat scale, now believe that, on the whole, we are ripe for acting much more selectively. During your address, you thanked your colleagues from the government. That was the wording. Does this mean that the government of Mishustin, in case of your victory, will remain? Well, after all, it is necessary, we need to talk about this after the elections, after the counting of votes. It seems to me that this is simply incorrect now. But in general, the government is working, as we see, the results are obvious, these are objective data. The job is quite satisfactory. You mentioned a reduction in tax time for large families. In general, children and the demographic situation, these topics were very voluminous in your address. Indeed, the question is quite painful, because demographically Russia is melting. And last year was an anti-record birth rate. Well, as you know, now on 1, the birth rate is 131, 130, 131. 39 children per woman of childbearing are capable of trembling. But perhaps, ideally, we would need to double, probably 3, because this is literally a disaster for society. Nevertheless, you have proposed a fairly large-scale program to support motherhood and such demographic incentives. There is confidence that these measures, they will reverse the trajectory from descending to ascending. Well, in general, if we proceed from all measures to support families with children, then for 6 years, we plan to spend up to 14 trillion rubles through various channels. That's a lot of money. And there are a lot of ways to support families with children. Starting from general social, construction or renovation of kindergartens, construction of new schools, repair of old schools, bringing order in accordance with the requirements of today. Support for women from pregnancy to 18 years of age of the child. After all, we have almost 400,000 women now receiving benefits. This is almost every third woman who is expecting a child. And more than 10 million children receive benefits. This is such a serious thing. We have continued the system of issuing collateral firm capital, maternity capital. We continued payments. Well, now we are making decisions from 450,000 rubles per family, if there is a third child, to repay the mortgage loan. We have retained mortgage benefits for families with children. In general, there is a whole set in very different directions in order to support families. And of course, you have already mentioned this, and this is the fight against poverty, because of course, it is much more difficult for families with children than for those families where there are no children. This is an understandable big expense, but nevertheless, we have managed to do a lot in this direction. Look here, if you look at 20 years ago, we had, in my opinion, 29% of the population below the poverty line. That's 42 million people. Now 9 3/10, according to the latest data, are percentages, but this is also 13.5 million people. Of course, a lot. Of course, everything can be done to reduce it to at least 7%. And for large families, there is a more modest indicator, but it should also be increased. But what do we proceed from when we talk about fertility problems? Well, I have said it many times, and experts say it. These are objective things. Namely, we had two very large declines in the birth rate during the Great Patriotic War 43rd-44th year. There was a comparable decline immediately after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Just one-on-one. The same decrease in the birth rate. It is clear why the social support system collapsed, no matter how weak it was in the USSR, if we can talk about it. But she was there. And after the collapse of the Soviet Union, it also disappeared almost completely. Well, there the poverty began completely. What are you talking about? There's no need right now. In any case, the family planning horizon has decreased in these years, and the birth rate has fallen before the military, before the war years. Then, we had a rise, and now we have quite a large number of children, young people, who will enter adulthood and childbearing age in a few years. And we assume that our indicators will also increase. What you said is a global trend. There are only a few countries with developed economies that show positive demographic dynamics. In all other countries, everything goes into negative territory. This is a complex problem related to the economy with women's life priorities. Now it's better not to get in there. Let demographers try and tell us and suggest solutions to us. But do you know what sets you up in a positive way? The mood in society. 70% of men and 72% of women want to have 2 or more children. Here. And the state should support them. This is a whole set of support measures that we are planning. They definitely need to be implemented, and we will do it. But it is still more important to be sure that these measures will turn the situation around. Not yet. And now in the late 90s, this is a well-known story. You told me about it yourself. You saved your children from the fire. They literally entered the burning house on the second floor. And then they remembered that there was money somewhere else. But the money was burned in the fire. This speaks to your priorities. First the kids, then the money. Maybe now it's the same on a national scale, and it's not 14 to spit, but there's just everything. And to create such a program to guarantee to reverse this situation. You know, we need to look at this in the course of events as they see. At the beginning of the 2000s, we took a number of steps in the field of demography, including maintaining maternity capital, and a number of other measures that gave an obvious positive result. This means that we can achieve the normal ones that we need. Is there such an experience? There is experience. Of course, there is experience. And using this experience and other modern developments, we still have to count on the fact that we will achieve the goals that we set for ourselves. Well, as events develop, we will adjust these measures or add something else to the measures that we will apply. Well, for example, here we have just announced the year of the family. We have a new project, a national family appears. There are elements there, elements that we have never used before. But for example, 75 billion will be planned by the region, where the birth rate is lower than the national average. These are mainly the central regions of Russia and the Northwest. 75 billion is a decent amount of money. You just need to use them competently and competently. There is also such a component as caring for the elderly. There are other support measures. We need to raise the birth rate and increase life expectancy, and then we will stabilize the country's population. Here, of course, but this is the most important integral indicator of our successful, or perhaps work, that requires additional attention from all administrative levels and authorities. Yes, but everywhere in the world, there is also a third tool for solving demographic problems, emigration. What figures can we talk about here in this 6-year period, and what does consistency mean in this work? Well, emigrants, if we talk about migrant workers, we do not have so many compared to other countries. They make up 3 to 7% of the total number of employees, but they are concentrated in those regions where economic life is most active, and of course, there are an order of magnitude more of them there. These are the Moscow region, Moscow, the northwestern region, some regions of the north, where the salary level is decent. But without any doubt, this is an issue that requires special attention from the local, regional, and federal authorities. Here is what I would like to say. Here is a very important thing. After all, when migrant workers are attracted, they always talk about the need to do this due to a shortage of workers. Our entrepreneurs should understand that the situation for them, in terms of the availability of workers, will not change for the better in the coming years. They will face a labor shortage. So, in order to solve this problem cardinally, I am now returning to what we have already talked about. It is necessary to increase labor productivity and reduce the number of workers in those areas where it can be done, achieving even greater results by introducing modern technology. But to do this, we need to invest in this area and train personnel. We are already talking about this too. This is the most important thing we need to think about. But in general, of course, migration policy is an important tool in the economy. It's not a sin to look at the experience of other countries. First of all, of course, we need to talk about the repatriation of our compatriots. What repatriations are and what compatriots are, we have already reflected in the regulatory framework. There is no need to repeat here. Here, we need to talk about attracting people who, perhaps, are not going to move to the Russian Federation, but because of their qualifications, because of their talents in various fields, they can make a significant contribution to the development of our state in various ways, to the development of Russia. We will also be happy to attract such people. As for traditional migrant workers, we also need to think about how to prepare for their arrival in Russia, including with our partners in the countries where they live. This is the study of the Russian language, our traditions, culture, and so on. It is necessary so that they are taken care of here and treated like human beings, so that they integrate into our society in a natural way. All of this together should give a corresponding, I hope, positive effect. Well, yes, and of course, everyone must observe our traditions, the laws of the Russian Federation, and of course, compliance with sanitary standards is very much in demand, and so on and so on. This is ensuring the safety of citizens of the Russian Federation should be in the first place. The Russians are probably the largest divided nation in the world, and so you had a conversation with the leaders of Russia and one of your interlocutors. One of your interlocutors said that in the Zaporozhye region, we found out that they are the same Russians as we are. For them it is today. It was such an impression that it sounded like some kind of revelation. Well, in general, it really is. And we are now growing into new regions. And here Odessa is a Russian city. And here, probably, there is a lot of hope here, probably, in this direction too. Of course, the population density in these regions has always been quite high. The climate is wonderful. As for Donbass, it is an industrially developed region. Back in the days of the Soviet Union, how much the Soviet Union invested in this region, in its coal mining industry, the metallurgical industry. Yes, of course, investments are required in order for everything to be modern, production. The living and working conditions of people were built in a completely different way, not as it was a couple of decades ago. As for Novorossiya, it is a pronounced region, with a pronounced developed agriculture. Here, we will do everything to support both traditional areas of activity and new ones that fit seamlessly into these regions and into the desire of people to develop them. And there, you know, as people are very talented. Moreover, as I have already said, even taxes and the federal budget are already coming from there. Yes, at this stage, they need to be helped, supported, and pulled out to the Republican, federal Russian level. But they will earn, and earn very quickly. Historically, it is quite obvious that the Nazi regimes themselves do not dissolve, but disappear as a result of military defeat. So it was in Germany, in Italy, in Japan. The same thing, obviously, will happen with the Bandera Nazi regime. And we are now advancing along the entire front line. Judging by the message and the Ministry of Defense of our war correspondents. Still, was it possible to find a way to fight when our losses are less on the offensive than on the defensive? In other words, this is a rather non-trivial task for the art of war, but it always holds back the offensive. Here is this thrift, completely justified in relation to our war heroes. But this question, it arises, how to move forward with minimal losses. The question is clear and fair, but the answer is also simple. It is necessary to increase the means of destruction, the number and power of the means of destruction, to increase the effectiveness of the forces and means used. Aviation, both tactical and army, even strategic. I mean, of course, in those components that are acceptable for armed conflicts of this kind. These are ground-based weapons of destruction, including high-precision, artillery, armored vehicles. We are developing, without any exaggeration, by leaps and bounds. In this direction? Yes, and so it happens. This is the answer to your question. The more powerful and more weapons of destruction, the fewer losses. But still, the question arises, what price are we willing to pay for the whole? Well, maybe the word project does not fit, but for all this forced. For all this challenge that we are forced to face. Historically, every human life is priceless. Each one. And the loss of a loved one for the family, for any family. She is a huge grief. But the question is what? The question is, in determining the very fact of what we are doing. What are we doing? In fact, we met today, you have just noticed, one of the participants in the conversation said, we found out with surprise that there are the same Russians as us. Yes, but we came to the aid of these people. That's basically the answer to our question. If we abandon these people today, our losses may increase many times tomorrow. And our children will have no future. Because we will feel insecure, we will be a third or fourth-class country. No one will take us into account if we cannot protect ourselves. And the consequences can be disastrous for the Russian statehood. That's the answer. Vladimir Vladimirovich, the Americans seem to be talking about negotiations, about strategic stability, but at the same time, they declare the need to inflict a strategic defeat on Russia. Our position sounds like we are open to negotiations, but at the same time, the time of kind gestures has passed, they are over. So there will be no negotiations. We have never refused to negotiate. But as without gestures, it means without compromises. It's like back then. I'll try to explain. When we were negotiating in Turkey, in Istanbul, I have already said this many times, I need to repeat it again, I will do it. Moreover, the negotiator and I from that side came to such a thick folio, a document, actually a contract, a draft contract, and an excerpt from this contract, it is available. It was initialed by the head of the negotiating group from Ukraine, Mr. Arakami. He did it, his signature is worth it, here it lies in the administration. But then, it is known that Mr. Arhami himself told the world publicly, also at a meeting, in my opinion, with journalists, even with foreign ones, former British Prime Minister Mr. Johnson came and dissuaded them from finally signing and accordingly executing this agreement. And the topic that you mentioned just now has started. It is necessary to defeat Russia on the battlefield. Here. Are we ready to negotiate? Yes, we are ready, but only ready to negotiate, not based on any kind of wish list after the use of psychotropic drugs, based on the realities that have developed, as they say in such cases, on Earth. This is the first one. Second, after all, we have been promised many things many times already. They promised not to expand NATO to the east, then we will see them at our borders. They promised, if not to delve into history like that, they promised that the internal conflict in Ukraine would be resolved by peaceful, political means. As we remember, 3 foreign ministers arrived in Kiev. Poland, Germany, and France have promised that they will be the guarantors of these agreements. A day later, there was a coup d'etat. They promised to fulfill the Minsk agreements and then publicly stated that they were not going to fulfill these promises, but only took a pause to arm the Bandera regime in Ukraine. We have been promised a lot of things, so promises alone are not enough here. Now we are negotiating only because they are running out of ammunition, but this is somehow ridiculous on our part. Nevertheless, we are ready for serious conversations. And we want to resolve all conflicts, and even more so this conflict, by peaceful means. But we must clearly understand for ourselves that this is not a pause that the enemy wants to take for rearmament. And this is a serious conversation with the guarantees of the security of the Russian Federation. And we know the various options in question. We know the carrots that are going to be shown to us in order to convince us that the moment has come. We want, I repeat once again, to resolve all disputes and this dispute, this conflict, by peaceful means. And we are ready for it. That's what we want. But it should be a serious conversation with ensuring security and up to the opposing side. But in this case, we are primarily interested in the security of the Russian Federation. So we will proceed from this. It seems to me that we somehow look too noble. Us. It will not happen that they will once again, we will conclude something with them there, and they will once again deceive us. And we will console ourselves with the fact that he is honest with us, they deceived us, that our fate in the end is to remain a fool all the time. But since the Americans, they have minted medals for themselves in the 90s for the victory in the Cold War. Since then, all these decades have been decades of big lies. How can we even hope that they will go and finally conclude an honest contract with us, which they will fulfill, and even with guarantees for us? But I do not know how to deal with them at all. Do you really believe that this is possible? I don't want to say this, but I don't believe anyone. But we need guarantees. And guarantees should be prescribed. They should be such that we would be satisfied, in which we will believe. That's what it's about. But now it's probably premature to talk publicly about what it could be. But certainly, absolutely, we will not buy into some just empty salting. I am afraid that you will be quoted in an extended way. Do you believe no one at all, or do you mean Western partners in this case, when you say that you don't believe anyone? Well, I prefer to be guided by facts, rather than good wishes, and talk about the fact that everyone can be trusted. After all, you understand that when you make a decision at this level, the degree of responsibility for the consequences of the decisions made is very high. Therefore, we will not do anything that does not correspond to the interests of our country. Well, what happened to Macron? Has he lost his mind at all? He is going to send French troops to fight with our army. Here it looks like such a fighting galley rooster, thereby scared all the Europeans. Yet how to react to this? The fact is that the military of Western countries have been present in Ukraine for a long time. Even before the coup, they were present, and after the coup, their number multiplied. Now they are present directly in the form of advisors. They are present in the form of foreign mercenaries and bear losses. But, if we are talking about official military contingents of foreign countries, I am sure that this will not change the situation on the battlefield. This is the most important thing. Just as the supply of weapons does not change anything. Second, this can lead to serious geopolitical consequences. Because if, say, Polish troops enter the territory of Ukraine for, as it sounds, to cover the Ukrainian-Belarusian border, let's say, or they're in such other places, in order to free up Ukrainian military contingents to participate in hostilities on the contact line, then I think that Polish troops will never leave there. But it seems so to me. In this case then, because they'll want it back, they sleep and see, they want to return those lands that they consider to be historically their own, and that were taken from them by the father of nations, Joseph Sergeyevich Stalin, and transferred to Ukraine. Of course, they want to return them, and if official Polish units enter there, they are unlikely to leave there. But then their examples may follow in other countries that lost part of their territories as a result of the Second World War. And I think that the geopolitical consequences for Ukraine, even from the point of view of preserving statehood in its modern form, they, of course, will rise in full growth throughout their Russia. If we go back to Macron, maybe he decided to take revenge on Russia in this way for the fact that we stepped on his tail in Africa, and we had to stand there to be afraid. Somehow, he probably didn't expect that we would be so active. Yes, I think he has some kind of resentment, but when we maintained direct contacts with him, we talked quite frankly about this topic. We did not climb into Africa and did not squeeze France out of there. But the problem is different. This is the notorious Wagner Group. She first carried out a number of economic projects in Syria, then moved to other African countries. The Defense Ministry is providing support, but only on the basis that this is a Russian group, nothing more. We didn't squeeze anyone out. It's just that the African leaders of some countries agreed with Russian economic operators, wanted to work with them, did not want to work with the French in some way. It wasn't even our initiative. It was an initiative on the part of our African friends. But it is unclear why we should be offended in this regard. If an independent state wants to develop relations with its partners from other countries, including Russia, it wants to develop relations with Russia. We didn't touch them, the former French colonizers in these countries. I even say this without irony, because in many countries where France has historically been a metropolis, but they don't really want to deal with them. We have nothing to do with it. Well, probably, it's more convenient to take offense at someone without seeing your own problems at the same time. Well, maybe such an acute reaction, quite emotional, on the part of the French president is connected, among other things, with what is happening in some African states. Although I know other African countries where they are calm about the French stay and say that yes, it suits us, we are ready to work with them. But in some countries they don't want to. But we have nothing to do with it. We are not encouraging anyone there. We are not setting anyone up against France. We do not set ourselves such tasks. To be honest, we do not have such national state tasks there, at the level of the Russian state. We're just friends with them and that's it. They want to develop relations with us, for God's sake, and we are going to meet them, and there's nothing to be offended about. But now they say in France that there are no red lines left in relation to Russia, and nothing is impossible, and everything is possible. And in general, they want to somehow talk to us on the basis of a balance of power. What we just don't hear from France, from the West, from Lithuania. In general, some kind of chorus, not harmonious, but hostile. But maybe we should also take a non-standard decision, and at some point ask for help from the 2 million North Korean army. Well, for example, in exchange for our nuclear umbrella over half of the Korean peninsula. Why not then? Well, first of all, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea has its own nuclear umbrella. They didn't ask us for anything. This is the first one. Secondly, in principle, as we see today from the results of what is happening on the battlefield, we are coping with the tasks that we set ourselves. As for those states that say that they have no red lines in relation to Russia, but then they should understand that in Russia, there will be no red lines in relation to these states either. As for the small state of Europe, first of all, we treat everyone with respect, no matter what, and secondly, that's when these small states, call for a tougher policy towards Russia, and take some extreme measures, including, let's say, to introduce troops and so on. After all, these are the states, and they understand this, that will not feel the consequences of the provocative statements they have made. But those who can feel, they behave much more restrained and correctly. Well, but all these dances with Germany, with the Tauruses, so Scholz says that we do not supply. There are forces that insist on putting up Taurs in Ukraine. The British are taking their initiative. They say, we are ready to send through England in transit. The goal is the Crimean Bridge. The generals are already planning German operations there, as we have heard, not only the Crimean Bridge, but also a military base, as they say, deep in Russian territory. Someone is already saying that these missiles can hit the Kremlin. In general, does not really bury himself in his dreams at all. They fantasize, they cheer themselves up first of all. Secondly, they are trying to intimidate us. As for Germany, there are problems there, problems of a constitutional nature. They are right to say, and if it is the Arises will fall into that part of the Crimean Bridge, which of course, even according to their concepts, is Russian territory. This is a violation of the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Germany. The fact is that the opposition, it behaves even more aggressively. Let's see what they agree on. We are already closely monitoring this. They also use British, American missiles. It doesn't change the situation on the battlefield. They are just on the island, of course, the damage is obvious. In fact, it does not change the course of hostilities. And in the consequences that inevitably come for the opposite side. We are now hearing that they have your channels and all foreign channels in the same FERG. German channels show that how many they have, how many are in a faulty condition, how many require improvement, modernization, and so on. Let them work. Well, as you correctly said, there are some things they should think about. Who is smarter, he thinks. But the new NATO members, Finland, Sweden in general, what have they exchanged for what? Swedish Foreign Minister Toby and Billstroy suddenly told the Turks that Sweden was against NATO bases being on Swedish territory. That they didn't understand where they entered at all, what happened to them. You have to ask them that. I don't know. We have quite good relations. Stable relations have been with these countries. And I think they benefited more from the fact that they adhere to neutrality, because it gives certain advantages, at least as a platform, a negotiating platform, in order to reduce tensions in Europe. We had perfect relations with Finland in general, just perfect. We didn't have a single claim to each other, especially geographically. I'm not talking about other areas. And we didn't have any troops. We removed all the troops from there, from the Russian-Finnish border. Why did they do it? Proceeding, in my opinion, from purely political considerations, I probably really wanted to be members of the Western Club, under some kind of umbrella. Frankly speaking, I don't understand why they need it. This is an absolutely senseless step, from the point of view of ensuring their own national interests. But nevertheless, it is up to them to decide. They decided so. But we didn't have troops there, now they will. There were no defeat systems there, now they will appear. That's why. Our economic relations were very good. They used our market, we bought a lot from them. There's nothing wrong with that, but now the situation will change. With their many products in other markets, they are not really needed, they receive less on ours. I don't understand. Well, meanwhile in the USA and, you know, this is a household thing, but nevertheless, in recent years, there and in Helsinki, especially in the border areas of Finland, Russian rubles were accepted there. Including in Helsinki, it was possible to buy goods for rubles in large supermarkets, whatever you want. There are all these ads in Russian all around. Now the border guard is simply going bankrupt there. But what am I talking about? But on the other hand, this is very good from an economic point of view. Real estate prices were kept at a fairly good level. From the point of view of economics, it's good, but there were apparently forces that were absolutely right, conservative, nationalist, who didn't really like it. Such a rapprochement with Russia. Russians buy houses there, buy apartments there, everything here is in Russian. Some even thought that it was redundant. Well, at the everyday level, I don't even know what I think, I know. At the household level, such Russophobia began to grow up. Maybe some political forces inside the country decided to take advantage of this wholesale role. Maybe. It is the totality of these factors that led to this decision. It seems so to me, but I can't say 100%. In any case, this is absolutely perfect, without improving the situation in any way, from the point of view of security, and in bilateral relations, and in Europe as a whole. But in the meantime, there is an active presidential election race in the United States. It can't do without you there. You invisibly participate in it, because each of the Republican candidates mentions you, and the Democratic Party argues in their speeches. And in general, it seems that you do not leave the pages of the newspaper, the headlines of the television news there. And now you are an argument in everyone's election campaign, and you are adding fuel to the fire, saying that one of the candidates is preferable for us. But if, in general, a foreign president says that one of the candidates in another country is preferable, then this is a classic interference in elections. In general, to what extent do you interfere in the American elections in this way, saying that Biden is preferable for us? And in general, as far as it is it trolling or otherwise, what is it? No, you know, I'm going to tell you one thing that will show that nothing changes in my preferences here. The first one. Secondly, we do not interfere in any way in any elections. And, as I have said many times, we will work with any leader who is trusted by the American people, the American voter. But here's what's curious. Even in the last year of his work as president, Mr. Trump, today's presidential candidate, reproached me for sympathizing with Biden. That was more than 4 years ago. He told me so in one of the conversations. You want to win. Well, I'm sorry, I'll tell you how he is, it's just a direct speech. So that Sleeping Joe wins. He told me so when he was still president. And then, to my surprise, he was persecuted for allegedly supporting him as a candidate. Some kind of full one has been accepted. As for today's pre-election situation, it is becoming increasingly uncivilized. I would not like to make any comments on this. But it is already absolutely clear, I think it is obvious to everyone, that the American political system cannot claim to be democratic in all senses of this meaning of the word. But in general, to be honest, your preference for Biden, it sounds quite strange to me personally. After all, in the 2011 year, Biden came to Moscow and persuaded you not to go to the president. Do you remember this story? Then he told about it, meeting with the Russian opposition in Spasochaos, and Gary Kasparov wrote about it, that Biden told this story, that he came to the Russian White House, to Prime Minister Putin, and tried in every way to dissuade him from running for president, otherwise they would arrange an Arab Spring for us. That is, Biden was not very enthusiastic at all back then. You have such a historic duel with him. Or you just already have it somehow. Somehow not really paying attention to it, and you didn't even pay much attention to a duel, so it was serious for him, but not for you. Well, that's exactly the sign of interference. This is 100% outright interference in our internal political processes, and we have already said many times, and I have said many times, we will not allow anyone to do this. Well, if you get away from interference, election battles, in fact, the escalation continues. And it seems that both superpowers, Russia and the United States, are playing what is called chicken game in America. This is when the chickens are rushing. Suddenly they jump on each other, and there it's a game when guys in cars fly into each other's forehead. And who will turn first? It seems that no one is going to turn off first. So a collision is inevitable. Why not? Well, the US has announced that they are not going to send troops. So we know what American troops are on Russian territory. Interventionists. That's how we're going to treat it. Even if they appear on the territory of Ukraine, they understand this. There, as I said, Biden is a man, a representative of the traditional political school. This is confirmed. And, well, in addition to Biden and others, there are enough specialists in the field of Russian-American relations and in the field of strategic restraint. Therefore, I don't think that everything is rushing so head-on here, but we are ready for this. I've said it many times, it's a matter of life and death for us, and for them, it is a question of improving their tactical position in general in the world situation, but also in Europe in particular. Maintaining your status among your allies. This is also important, but not as much as for us. Interestingly, you said that we are ready for this. Here the philosopher Alexander Dugin calls directly, well, a specialist in geopolitics, calls directly and practically, to prepare for a nuclear war. And the better we are prepared for it, the less likely such a war is, says Alexander Dugin. How can you even be ready for this? Are we really ready for a nuclear war? From a military technical point of view, we are, of course, ready. We have them constantly. They are constantly on alert. This is the first one. And secondly, and this is also a recognized thing, our triad, the nuclear triad, it is more modern than any other triad. Only we have such triads before the Americans, in fact. And we have made much more progress here. We have it more modern, and the whole nuclear component. In general, we have approximate parity in terms of carriers and charges, but we have a more modern one. But everyone knows this, the experts know everything, but this does not mean that we should measure the number of carriers and warheads. But you need to know about it. And those who need it, I repeat, experts, specialists, the military, they are well aware of this. They are now setting goals to increase this modernity, novelty, and they have corresponding plans there. We know about it too. They develop all their components, and so do we. But this does not mean that, in my opinion, they are ready to unleash this nuclear war tomorrow, but they want, well, what should they do? We're ready. But maybe, to make it more convincing, we should conduct nuclear tests at some point. After all, we do not have international restrictions for this. There is an agreement banning tests of this kind. But unfortunately, the United States has not ratified this treaty either, and therefore, in order for parity to be observed here, we have withdrawn this ratification. Since the treaty was not ratified in the United States, it did not enter into force definitively, because it did not gain the necessary number of ratifications. Nevertheless, we adhere to these agreements. But we know that the United States is considering the possibility of conducting such tests. Is this related to what? This is due to the fact that when new warheads appear, as some experts believe, it is not enough to test them only on a computer. They need to be tested in their natural form. Here are such ideas in certain circles in the United States. They hover, have a place to be. We are aware of this, but we are also looking if they conduct such tests. I don't rule it out, absolutely. We need it, we don't need it. We still need to think about it, but I don't rule out that we can do the same. But are we technically ready for this? Yes, we are always ready. I want it to be clear, these are not conventional weapons. This is the kind of troops that are in constant combat readiness. Vladimir Vladimirovich, but still, in the difficult moments of last year at the front in connection with Kharkiv or Kherson, did you have a thought about tactical nuclear weapons? Despite the fact that it was at the suggestion of the then command of this group that a decision was made on our part to withdraw troops from Kherson. But this did not mean at all that our front was falling apart there. There was nothing like it or close to it. It was just done in order not to incur unnecessary losses among the excess composition. In other words, this was the main motive, because, in the conditions of combat operations, when it was impossible to fully supply the group located on the right bank, we would simply incur unjustified losses of personnel. That's why it was decided to relocate to the left bank. And the correctness of such a choice was confirmed by what the Ukrainian command tried to do in certain sections of the left bank, in the same locality to the market. Just like throwing their people into a meat grinder, that's all. They have been running barefoot there lately in the literal sense of the word, So, they tried to throw ammunition there with high-speed boats and drones. Well, what is it? Well, it's just for the slaughter. They were just sent to slaughter. I once asked the chief of the general staff, well, there's nothing secret here. I say, listen, what do you think? And who makes such decisions from the other side? After all, the one who makes the decision understands that people are being sent to certain death. But who makes the decision? Why are they doing this? It's pointless. Meaningless from a military point of view. I say, which one? Well, I don't know. The top political leadership probably says there, based on political considerations, that they have some chance to break through our defenses there. There is some chance to get extra money, referring to the fact that they have some kind of bridgehead on the left bank. Here is some chance to present your position beautifully at international meetings. The team has passed, all the lower-ranking bosses automatically issue further. By the way, the prisoners who surrendered there in the field, they show that they did not even know what situation they were getting into there. And let's say, new units are thrown there, they say there is a stable defense, let's continue, help. They couldn't even get to the left bank anymore. A tragedy, natural from their point of view, absolutely. That's why, therefore, why should we use means of mass destruction? There is no need, there has never been such a thing. In other words, such an idea did not occur to you. No. And why? But weapons exist to be used. We have our own principles. What are they talking about? That we are ready to use weapons, including any weapons, including those you mentioned. If we are talking about the existence of the Russian state, damaging our sovereignty and independence, we have everything spelled out in our strategy. We didn't change it. When the outgoing President Yeltsin invited you to run for president, your first reaction was, I'm not ready. That's right, it's direct speech. Since then, of course, you have gone through a very big evolution. If you had to write a telegram to yourself at that time, what text would be in it? You see, this is completely. It's like a Yankee at King Arthur's court or something like that. It is impossible to answer this question, because the question was asked at that time, in the historical and economic context in which the country was located, in the internal political and internal security situation. And all of this together prompted me to the answer I gave. I'm not ready for that. And not because I was scared of something, but because the scale of the tasks, it was just huge, and the number of problems was increasing every day like a snowball. Therefore, I said it sincerely, and not because I repeat, I was afraid of something, because I think that I am not ready to solve all these problems, and God forbid they will do something even worse. That's what it was about. Therefore, I said it absolutely sincerely, and if I were to go back, I would repeat the same thing. Well, then what became decisive? You did go, didn't you? Probably conversations with Boris Nikolaevich. Well, probably the most important thing. After all, what did he say to me then? He said, okay, I understand, we'll come back to this later. And we've come back to that a few times. In the end, he said that here I am an experienced person, I know what I'm doing, what I'm offering. Well, he said some other things. I probably feel uncomfortable praising myself. Well, I said such positive words. Later he confirmed it again, already quite there in a positive way. No, I'm not going to talk about it now. And when the work started, everything was completely different there. There, you know, when you work, there you think, this is what you need right now, this is now, it's gone and gone. There already, when you get involved in work, it's a completely different story. No time to be afraid already. Yes, it's not about fears, but it's about understanding the ability to solve these problems. Well, remember for yourself what the 99th year is, and in the economy, in the field of security, and in all finance. You once told me that admission to Leningrad University was for you, this preparation for admission, a turning point for you. It was the situation when you had to go all in, and realizing, either I will do it now and cope, or then I will carry out the plans that I want, and you were already going to work in the KGB, or I lost, and then everything is different, and there is no chance.
Я проиграл, и тогда все по-другому, и шансов нет.
That Russia is now also in a position where it is necessary to play all in? First of all, I didn't have such a position then. So, because yes, I wanted to work in the state security agencies. That's exactly the admission. It was such a turning point, that's the feeling, right? It's either that or that. It's the same. Not really, because I was told, I just came to the reception, said I would like to work, what is needed for this? The alternative was simple. I was told I either need to get a higher education, and the best legal education, or serve in the army, or have at least 3 years of work experience, but it's better to serve in the army. So if I hadn't gone to university, I would have joined the army. Yes, it was a longer path to the goal that I set for myself, but it was still there. There is always an alternative. Have you acted with tension? Well, yes, of course, because I studied it after all, at a school, with a chemical and mathematical bias. And here it was necessary to take humanities subjects. I had to leave one thing and do the other. Well, yes, of course there was tension. It was necessary to independently learn a foreign language, German in this case. It was necessary to study history, literature, and so on. Russia's also at a crossroads now. Either it turns out, or Russia is not at a crossroads. It is on the strategic path of its development and will not turn away from its path. Which one? To what extent do you feel the support of Russian society and in its new quality? Because there is a new quality of Russian society. It was. It just showed up. And it is very good that we have given this deep Russian society the opportunity to express itself. I think I have a feeling that people have been waiting for this for a long time. That, here is an ordinary person, he will be in demand by the country state, and B, the fate of the country depends on him. And this feeling of interconnection with the motherland, with the fatherland, of its importance in solving key tasks. In this case, in the field of security, it is it that has brought to the surface the strength of the Russian and other peoples of Russia. Are you fueled by this? Always. It's not that someone signs up. The fact is that I see the request of society. This is the most important thing, to meet the needs of society. But it's time to recognize that you play a key role not only in Russia, but also in the world, because billions of people associate with you the hope for international justice, for the protection of human dignity, for the protection of traditional values. How does it feel to feel such a scale of responsibility? To tell you honestly, I don't feel it at all. I'm just working in the interests of Russia, in the interests of our people. And yes, I understand what you are talking about now, and I am ready to comment on it. But so that I somehow feel like some kind of arbiter of some magistrates, there is no such thing. Believe me, even close. I am simply fulfilling my duty to Russia and to our people, who consider Russia their homeland. As for other countries of the world, the way we are treated around the world is closely related to this. That's interesting. It's a phenomenon, that's for sure. And what is here that I would like to pay attention to? You are absolutely right here. Here, many people in the world are looking at us, at what is happening in our country, and in our struggle for our interests. And that, in my opinion, is what is important. And why is this happening? It's not because we are formally members of the BRICS there, or we have some kind of traditional relations with Africa. It's also important, but the point, in my opinion, is completely different. It lies in the fact that this so-called golden billion, for centuries, 500 years, they practically parasitized other peoples. They tore apart the unfortunate peoples of Africa. They exploited Latin America, exploited Asian countries. And of course, no one has forgotten it. And I have a feeling that it's not even about the leadership of these countries, although this is very important, but ordinary citizens of these countries, they seem to feel in their hearts what is happening. And they associate our struggle for their independence and true sovereignty with their aspirations for their own independent development. But this is compounded by the fact that in the Western elites, there is a very strong desire to freeze the existing situation with an unfair state of affairs in international affairs. They have been accustomed for centuries to stuff their bellies with human flesh and their pockets with money. But they have to understand that the vampire ball is ending. That you are hinting at there, as you put it in your address, colonial habits. That's what you're talking about. Is that what's going on? Yes, that's how it all happens. But now you have painted a completely fair picture when people see some hope in Russia. And here's how it happened that Western propaganda, with all its power and colossal resources and tools, could not pupate Russia like that, isolate, and create a false image of it, although it sought in the minds of billions of people. That's how it happened. But because this is what I just said, it is more important for people. People all over the world feel this with their hearts. They don't even need any pragmatic explanations of what is happening, actually, despite the wall of this mud. In their own countries, they still fool people, and this has an effect. In many countries, they believe that this corresponds to their interests because they want to have on their borders such a huge country as Russia, the largest in the world in terms of territory, the largest in Europe in terms of population. Not such a large population in the world dimension. It cannot be compared with China or India, but it is the largest in Europe in terms of population, and now it is also the fifth largest economy in the world. But why do we need such a competitor? They think that it's better, as some American experts suggested, to divide it into 3, 4, 5 parts. It's better so it will be better for everyone. They proceed from this. And here they are blinded by this, some of these Western elites at least, blinded by their Russophobia. They were happy when they brought us to the line, after which our attempts began to stop the unleashed Western war, and the war in Ukraine from the 2014 year by force, when we moved on to conducting a special military operation. They were even happy, I think, because they thought they were going to finish us off. Now, under this barrage of sanctions, almost a sanctions war declared to us, with the help of Western weapons, and war by the hands of Ukrainian nationalists, they will end Russia. Hence the slogan, to inflict a strategic defeat on Russia on the battlefield. But later came the realization that this was unlikely, and even later, that it was impossible. And it came to an understanding that instead of a strategic defeat, they are faced with the impotence they faced, and with impotence, despite the fact that they relied on the power of the all-powerful United States, faced with impotence before the unity of the Russian people, before the fundamental foundations of the Russian financial, economic system, its stability, and the growing capabilities of the armed forces of the Russian Federation.
Перед фундаментальными основами российской финансово-экономической системы, устойчивости ее, и перед растущими возможностями вооруженных сил Российской Федерации.
And that's when they began to think, well, those who are smarter, began to think that it would be necessary to change some strategy with respect to the Russian Federation. But then there were ideas to resume the negotiation process, to find some ways to end this conflict, to look for where Russia's real interests are here. These are dangerous people, by the way, because it is easier to fight with people who are guided by such base principles.
С людьми, которые руководствуются такими низменными принципами, с ними проще бороться.
Do you remember how in Russia they used to say how happy some people were, but at this level, what was it?
Но по тому уровню в чем-то
He's full, drunk, and his nose is full of tobacco. Yes, it's easier with such people.
проще.
It's full, drunk, that is, he ate, got drunk, his nose was in tobacco, because snuff was used. But now the nose is in cocaine, right? Well, yes. Well, it doesn't matter. It's easier with these, and it's more difficult with smart ones. They are more dangerous, because they affect the consciousness of society, including ours. They will throw out all sorts of their wishes under the guise of carrots for us. You have already paid attention to this when you asked about the possibility of a negotiation process.
Это внимание, когда задали вопрос о возможности переговорного процесса.
But nevertheless, this is where the contradictions arose within the Western community.
Внутри западного сообщества.
This is an obvious thing, we see it. We are not going to engage in splits there, they will do it brilliantly themselves. But we will certainly seek to respect our interests.
Соблюдение наших интересов.
I can't help but ask, Vladimirovich, these attacks on the Belgorod and Kursk regions are just military actions that are taking place in our regions. They behave more brazenly. They feel something. What is it caused by?
Которые идут в наших областях, они ведут себя более нагло, они что-то чувствуют, чем это вызвано.
The explanation is very simple. All this is happening against the backdrop of failures on the contact line, on the front line. They have not achieved any of the goals they set for themselves last year.
Они не достигли.
Moreover, now the initiative has completely passed to our armed forces.
Инициатива полностью перешла к нашим вооруженным силам.
Everyone knows this. Everyone recognizes it. I don't think I'm going to say anything new here.
Я не скажу.
But, against the background of those failures, at least something needs to be shown.
Сказать.
And most of all, attention should have been focused on the information side of the matter.
Должно было бы быть сосредоточено на информационной стороне дела.
Here, on the state border line, the enemy tried to attack.
Значит, противник пытался атаковать
First of all, sabotage groups.
диверсионными группами.
Here is the latest report of the General Staff, somewhere up to 300 people, including with the participation of foreign mercenaries.
300 человек, в том числе с участием иностранных наемников.
The enemy's losses amounted to more than 300 people, more than 200, about 230 bonuses. Of the 8 tanks used, the enemy lost 7, 9 of the 9 armored vehicles, 7 of them American-made Bradley.
5 бронемашин 9. Из них 7 американского производства Брэдли.
Other armored vehicles were also used, but mainly for the transportation of personnel. They are being brought in. Thrown out immediately on the Belarusian section of the border, there is still a little further south, in my opinion, in one place. They're with much smaller forces.
Там еще чуть южнее, по-моему, в одном месте. Там гораздо меньшими силами.
But nevertheless, the main goal, I have no doubt about it, is to, if not disrupt the presidential elections in Russia, then at least somehow interfere with the normal process.
В России, то хотя бы как-то помешать нормальному процессу.
The citizen's statement came out, the first one. The second is the informational effect, which I have already mentioned.
Я уже сказал.
But the third thing is, if at least something works out, to get some chance, some argument, some trump card, in the possible future negotiation process.
В будущем переговорном процессе.
We will return it to you, and you are here. But I said that with people who are guided by the principles of full, drunk and nose in a well-known material, then in something.
В известном материале то, в чем
It's easier to talk to them because you can count what they're going to do.
собираются делать.
They will also try on some other sites, but we see it.
На некоторых других участках, мы это видим.
Here we mentioned the episode when you saved the children from a fire.
Эпизод, когда вы спасли детей из пожара,
If you already have grandchildren, which country would you like to leave to your grandchildren?
вы хотели бы оставить внукам.
You know, at the first stage, we need to fulfill everything that was stated in the message to the Federal Assembly a few days ago.
Несколько дней назад.
We have big plans. We have them of a very specific nature in the field of economic development, social sphere, support for motherhood, childhood, families with children, support for pensioners. We have been talking very little about this lately, or not talking about it, but we have the appropriate resources laid down here as well. And this concerns the indexation of pensions, various benefits. This concerns long-term care for people who need it. In general, I would like to say that the people of the older generation are those, thanks to whom we have a fairly strong, stable statehood and economy today, including because, despite all the twists and turns, the hardest tests for the economy in the 90s, it resisted, thanks to their heroic work. After the Great Patriotic War and during the economic recovery. Therefore, we should never forget about this, about the words of the older generation. We should always remember this and pay tribute to them. For today, ensuring their well-being. But the future belongs to children, so I have already talked about programs in the field of motherhood and childhood. But all this is done only on the basis of economics. I hope that it will be more technologically advanced, more modern, based on the latest achievements of science, technology, information technology, artificial intelligence, robotics, genetics, and so on and so on. Agriculture is developing in our country, and modern technologies are also needed there. They are actively used and will be used further. And of course, the country will be self-sufficient in the field of ensuring its security and defense. All of this together, we will have to multiply many times. And the future will be secured. Thank you, Vladimirovich. Your confidence is infecting. Success in your noble deeds. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.